Some confessions squeeze your chest so tightly that every word left unspoken grows into a mountain, becoming heavier with time. Today, I finally share what this suffocation has been doing to me, the secret I have buried deep in my heart. At 58 years old, something happened that made me feel more alive than I ever had before. And it came at the most unexpected time. That morning, the kitchen faucet was acting up again. The dripping sound echoed in my otherwise silent home, a reminder of how monotonous my days had become since my wife passed. Loneliness, silence, and routine had become my unwelcome companions. Whenever something in the house needed fixing, I had to call someone. This time, I picked a repair service online. "Hello, this is Ethan from Rapid Repairs. I can come by today," the voice on the other end of the line said. There was something about his tone, steady, calm, yet filled with an unexplainable warmth. I tried not to think much of it. After all, it was just a faucet issue. But when the doorbell rang, everything changed. I opened the door and there he was, young, confident, and full of energy that instantly brightened my dull world. Ethan shifted his toolbox from his shoulder, his presence filling the space in a way I hadn't expected. "The kitchen is this way," I said, my voice catching slightly. I led him down the hall, suddenly hyper-aware of my surroundings, of myself. Ethan's broad frame seemed to take up the entire hallway. His fitted work shirt accentuated his strong build, and I found myself staring for a second longer than I should have. When was the last time I had even noticed someone like this? The thought unsettled me, but I pushed it aside. He stepped into the kitchen with an air of quiet confidence, kneeling to inspect the old pipes beneath the sink. "It's an old system," he remarked, running his hands along the worn metal. "It might take a few hours, but I can fix it." His calm voice took me by surprise. I wasn't used to such assuredness, such effortless capability. I stood there, trying to focus on anything but the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt as he worked. "Could you grab me a towel?" he asked, pointing at a small leak. "Of course," I replied quickly, moving to the cabinet, but as I reached for the towel, I realized my hands were trembling slightly. Why was I so nervous? This was just a simple repair job, and yet the air between us felt charged with something unspoken. When I handed him the towel, our fingers brushed for just a moment. The touch was brief, fleeting, but it sent a ripple through me. It was as if years of solitude had suddenly made way for something unexpected, something I wasn't sure how to process. Ethan looked up at me then, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. That silence between us carried the weight of years of expectations, of emotions I thought had long since faded. For the first time in years, I felt something stir within me, a longing, a curiosity, a realization that maybe, just maybe, life had more to offer than the loneliness I had resigned myself to. And that was only the beginning. "Thanks," he said, returning to his work. But that quick look in his eyes completely shook me. I kept wondering, was it just a fleeting moment? Or had this young man awakened something inside me that had been frozen for years? As Ethan bent down to fix the faucet, I found myself pacing around the kitchen, unsure of what to do with my hands. They were either tangled together or gripping the counter, and the silence in the room was becoming suffocating. But what truly tightened my chest was his presence. My eyes kept drifting to him, drawn by his youth, his energy, and the way he focused so intently on his work. I didn't understand why, but something deep inside me was stirring, something I hadn't felt in years. Feeling the need to break the silence, I spoke without thinking. "Not many young repairmen these days," I said, realizing a beat too late that it was an unnecessary comment. "How long have you been doing this?" I asked. Ethan paused and glanced over his shoulder at me. The moment our eyes met, a warmth rushed through me, though he seemed to deliberately ignore it. 5 years, he said, returning to his work. Started as an apprentice, then started my own business. My curiosity got the best of me. "How old are you?" I asked, my voice carrying a hint of admiration I couldn't quite hide. 26, he answered without hesitation. I was surprised he was so young, yet at the same time, I felt a flutter inside me. His youth both excited and intrigued me in a way I hadn't expected. "Ah," I said, trying to smile. "If you hadn't told me, I wouldn't have guessed. You seem more mature." Ethan didn't respond right away, but I noticed the slightest shift in his expression, like my words had thrown him off. After a few moments of silence, he refocused on the repair. His professionalism helped me gather myself, but a small, flirtatious part of me still lingered. "Want some coffee after you're done?" I asked, shifting the conversation. "I have a great coffee machine. People say my coffee is pretty damn good." He hesitated for a second, his shoulders tensing slightly. Then he glanced at me again, like he was making some internal calculation. "Thanks, but I've got a lot of work today. I'll have to head out as soon as I'm done." I couldn't deny I felt a little disappointed, but it was clear Ethan was intent on keeping things professional. Maybe that was part of what made him even more intriguing. He took his work seriously, never letting his professionalism waver, even at his young age. When he finished the job, I noticed him glancing at me a few times as he packed up his toolbox. There was something in those looks, attraction, curiosity, maybe even hesitation. "All done," he said, slinging the toolbox over his shoulder. "The hot water should be working fine now. If there are any issues, just give me a call." "I will for sure," I said, gripping the door frame. "Thanks for handling it so quickly." "Guess that's the advantage of youth." This time he gave me a slight smile, but still maintained his professional demeanor. He walked toward the door and then paused for just a second as if he wanted to say something, but instead, he simply nodded at me and left. It felt like something had formed between us in that brief encounter, a connection that shouldn't have happened, but I had no idea where it would lead. All I knew was that for the first time in a long while, my heart was beating fast. I couldn't help but wonder, was this just about a plumbing issue? Or had this young man entered my life to stir something deeper? The next morning, as I stepped into the kitchen to make breakfast, I reached for the faucet and turned the handle. Ice-cold water gushed out. My stomach flipped. I stared at the faucet, my mind racing. Had he not fixed it properly? Or was this some strange twist of fate? I hesitated for a moment, then reached for my phone. My fingers hovered over the screen, my breath catching in my throat as I scrolled through my recent calls and found his number. Taking a shaky breath, I tapped the call button. The phone rang once, twice, and then I heard his voice. "Hello?" "Hey, Ethan," I said, adding a touch of urgency to my voice. "I think the faucet you fixed yesterday is acting up again. I'm really sorry, but would it be possible for you to come back?" There was a brief pause before Ethan answered, his tone as professional as ever. "Sure, I'll bring some spare parts with me this time so we can fix it for good. I'll be there in about an hour." I thanked him, and as I hung up, an unexpected wave of anticipation washed over me. This time, I wanted to be ready, but at the same time, I wanted to appear unprepared. As I rummaged through my wardrobe, my fingers brushed against my favorite black lace nightgown. Just something comfortable, I told myself, but I knew better the moment I caught my reflection in the mirror. When the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath and opened the door. Ethan's eyes flickered over me for a split second before he quickly composed himself. He carried his tool bag and a few extra pipe pieces. "Hey," I greeted him, acting as if my attire was completely normal. "I hope I'm not bothering you too much. This faucet is driving me crazy." Ethan avoided my gaze and made his way toward the bathroom. "No problem," he said. "I'll make sure it's fixed for good this time." I followed him inside, watching as he bent over to inspect the faucet. His movements were swift and practiced, but I noticed a certain tension in his posture. "Does this kind of thing happen often?" I asked, breaking the silence. The thin fabric of my nightgown brushed against my skin, making me feel bolder. "I mean, do the things you fix break again sometimes?" Without looking up, Ethan replied, "Sometimes, but this time I'm sure it'll be fine. I have all the parts I need." "How careful you are," I said with a slight smile. "I guess you're really good at your job, especially for someone so young." As I reached toward the faucet, my hand accidentally brushed against his arm. Ethan froze for a moment, but quickly returned to his work. He didn't acknowledge the touch, but I could sense the shift in his demeanor. "I'm just trying to do my job," he finally said, his voice quieter than before. A silence settled between us. His distant attitude only made me bolder. While he leaned over to inspect a pipe beneath the sink, I let my hand rest lightly on his back. "It's really hard to find someone as skilled as you," I said, my voice teasing. This time, Ethan straightened up and turned to face me. There was something in his expression, uncertainty, tension, and a desperate attempt to maintain control. "Sarah," he said, my name sounding almost like a warning. "This job is almost done. After this, I won't need to bother you anymore." His voice was firm, but for a moment, the resolve in his eyes faltered. Watching him try to escape this situation only heightened my excitement, stirring a desire I hadn't felt in years. The tension between us had reached its limit, and it was only a matter of time before someone crossed the line. As Ethan leaned forward to tighten a pipe, I leaned back against the nearby cabinet, watching him intently. The soft fabric of my nightgown shifted with my movements, clinging to my body in a way that accentuated my silhouette. Ethan kept his focus on his work, pretending not to notice, but the tremble in his hands was proof that he wasn't resisting me. He was battling himself. "Are you sure you know exactly what you're doing?" I asked, infusing a light teasing tone into my voice. Ethan didn't look up, his focus still on his work, but I noticed his breathing quicken slightly. "Of course," he replied shortly. "This is a piece of cake." "Really?" I stepped a little closer. "Then why does it keep breaking every couple of days?" Bending down, I pretended to grab a towel from the cabinet. As I did, the thin strap of my nightgown slipped off my shoulder. Wearing it gave me a strange confidence I hadn't felt in years. When Ethan finally looked up, his gaze halted for just a second before he quickly turned back to his work, this time moving faster, as if determined to finish as quickly as possible. "Maybe there's something else in the bathroom causing the problem," he said, tightening the faucet, but his voice had a slight crack in it, betraying his calm facade. "Maybe," I murmured, leaning back against the cabinet. "Or maybe the problem is just not finding the right touch." The words lingered between us. The silence in the small bathroom thickened, the air charged with something unspoken. Ethan stayed quiet for a long moment before finally setting his tools down and standing up. His movements were deliberate, but his expression was conflicted, caught between control and a desire he was struggling to restrain. I stepped closer, closing the already narrow distance between us until we were just inches apart. I could hear his breath, the rhythm unsteady. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Before I could finish, his hands were suddenly on my waist. The tension between us grew unbearable, each passing second stretching it tighter. The trembling in his body told me that something was about to snap, something neither of us could stop. Our silence was broken only by the sound of our breathing and the rapid beating of our hearts. "Sarah," he murmured, his voice weak as if caught in a battle he was about to lose. "We shouldn't do this." I tilted my head, drawing even closer. "Are you sure, Ethan?" At that moment, he hesitated. Just briefly, as if giving himself one last chance to walk away. Then, suddenly, he kissed me. It started slow, hesitant, but the passion between us ignited almost instantly. With our eyes closed, we sank into each other, the moment taking over as his arms tightened around me. Every second pulled us closer, our bodies pressing together as we stumbled out of the bathroom, bumping into walls along the way. Our hands tangled, our breaths merged, and in that wild, uncontrollable moment, I knew everything was about to change. By the time we reached the bedroom, Ethan had a firm grip on my waist, and without hesitation, I quickened my steps. Everything was moving so fast that my mind struggled to keep up, but my body had already surrendered to him completely. It was both a mistake and something entirely irreversible. Once inside, everything unraveled. Ethan's t-shirt was left abandoned in the bathroom, his pants hastily discarded on the floor beside the bed. My nightgown lay forgotten in the hallway, a trail of fabric stretching across the carpet. The room was a mess, yet neither of us could find the will to stop. The pull between us was undeniable, raw and overwhelming. I barely had time to process what was happening before we were caught in the moment, lost in something we couldn't control. It wasn't just passion, it was release. A long-buried need clawing its way to the surface, refusing to be ignored any longer. Even as I lost myself in him, a small part of me knew there would be consequences. But in that moment, I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was the fire between us, the undeniable gravity drawing us together. And there was no turning back now. We lay on the bed, bodies pressed together, our breaths sinking in a quiet rhythm. Everything had happened so fast that, for a moment, time seemed to stop. It was impossible to describe exactly what I was feeling, as if I were floating in a vast ocean of emotions. Ethan's strong arms remained wrapped around me, and though my eyes were closed, I was keenly aware of every sensation. "Can you breathe?" I asked with a small smile, resting my head against his chest. My hands were still on his body, feeling every subtle movement. Ethan's voice trembled slightly, but there was determination in it. "I guess so," he said, "but I've never felt anything like this before." A few seconds of silence passed, broken only by the sound of his breath, now slightly quicker than before. "Really?" I murmured, my lips still warmer than his. Ethan exhaled deeply, his fingers tangling gently in my hair. "So, what happens now, Sarah?" I hesitated, my mind spinning. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I guess it was always complicated, wasn't it?" "Maybe," he said, brushing his fingers through my hair again. "But one thing I do know, having you here right now means more than anything else." For a moment, time lost meaning. My thoughts blurred, and I let myself sink into the moment, enjoying the warmth and closeness between us. But then, as clarity returned to my mind, a question surfaced. Was this just a fleeting moment of madness, or was it something more? "How do we explain this?" I asked softly, smiling slightly. Ethan gazed at me, hesitation flickering in his eyes, but beneath it was something deeper. Desire? Certainty. "I don't think we need to explain it," he said slowly. "Some things don't need an explanation." We lay together in comfortable silence, our breaths mingling, caught up in the magic of what we had just experienced. But the question still lingered in my mind. "How does this end, Ethan?" I asked, looking into his eyes. "Have you thought about it?" He thought for a moment, then sighed, his fingers tracing patterns along my arm. "We'll think about it later," he finally said, his voice low. "Right now, let's just enjoy this." A complex mix of emotions swirled inside me, but one thing was certain. This moment was beyond everything. This night, this connection, was ours alone. No matter what happened after, it would remain unforgettable. Silence fell between us again, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with understanding, with the weight of something that neither of us fully grasped yet. It wasn't just about the past, nor about the future. It was about now. If you've made it this far, I know you're hooked on the story. There's so much more to share, and you won't want to miss any of it. Don't forget to hit the follow button, turn on notifications, and leave a comment. I'm eager to hear your thoughts, so let's chat in the comments. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, my hands fumbling with the delicate straps of my evening dress. The late afternoon sun poured through the sheer curtains, streaking the room with golden light, but my mind was elsewhere. I had just finished setting the dining table for dinner, waiting for him to come inside from the backyard, where he was repairing the wooden fence, a chore he had taken on without me even asking. As I pulled one strap back over my shoulder, adjusting my bra underneath, my usually nimble fingers felt clumsy as I struggled with a small clasp. Just as I thought I had secured it, the clasp on my other strap came undone. The dress slipped, and for a fleeting moment I stood frozen in surprise, staring at my reflection as the fabric pooled at my waist, leaving me in nothing but lace and the glow of the setting sun. It was in that moment, just as I reached to pull the dress back up, that I heard it. A soft knock on the doorframe. "Dinner smells amazing. Do you need—" I turned sharply, clutching the dress against me. There stood my stepson, framed by the doorway. Alex's gaze lingering for a second too long before he realized and quickly turned his head away. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice tight and hurried, as if he had forgotten how to breathe. "I didn't mean to." "It's fine," I cut him off, though the heat rising to my cheeks betrayed my calm tone. "The door must have been ajar." He nodded, backing away as if the air between us had suddenly become charged. His eyes flickered up once to meet mine before he disappeared down the hallway. I stood there for a moment, gripping the fabric of my dress and staring at the empty doorway, my heart pounding in a way that felt both foreign and familiar. I am 48, a widow for nearly 5 years now, living in this spacious house that feels too big and too quiet for just me. My late husband, Michael, left me with everything I needed: comfort, security, the kind of life most people dream of. But he also left me with an emptiness I hadn't anticipated, one that echoed in every room and every mundane task. Then there's Alex, Michael's son from his first marriage. He's 30 now, tall, with a quiet confidence that is both endearing and maddening. When Michael passed, Alex had insisted on staying in my life. "Family doesn't just stop," he had said at the funeral, his hand warm on mine, his grief mirroring my own. Over the years, he has been my lifeline in ways I didn't expect, helping around the house, fixing the little things that Michael would have taken care of, moving heavy boxes up from the attic. We fell into an easy rhythm, one where his company felt like a balm for the loneliness I tried so hard to hide. But lately, I've noticed something. It's in the way his eyes linger a second too long when I hand him a glass of iced tea, the way he stands just a little closer than necessary when we're flipping through old photo albums. I've tried to dismiss it as my imagination, chalking it up to the way grief plays tricks on a lonely heart. But after what just happened, after the way his voice hitched and his cheeks flushed, I'm not so sure anymore. That night at dinner, the air between us was thick with something unspoken. He sat across from me, his sleeves rolled up, his tan forearms resting casually on the edge of the table as he complimented the roasted chicken I had made. I smiled, nodding at his words, but I couldn't focus. All I could think about was the moment in the doorway, the way his eyes had widened before he quickly looked away, like he had seen something he shouldn't have, like he wanted to look longer but knew he couldn't. The thing is, I wasn't as angry as I should have been, shouldn't I? I should have felt outraged or embarrassed, or something closer to the kind of indignation a woman in my position is supposed to feel. But instead, there was only a strange, unwelcome heat curling in my chest, spreading to places I hadn't thought about in years. As I sipped my wine, I caught him glancing at me, his eyes dropping quickly to his plate when I met his gaze. For the first time, I felt something shift. It wasn't just me noticing him, it was him noticing me. After dinner, he offered to wash the dishes. I watched him from the living room, the steady rhythm of water running and plates clinking, lulling me into a trance. His broad shoulders moved under his t-shirt as he leaned forward over the sink, and for a moment, I forgot myself. I forgot that I'm the woman who raised him. I forgot the decades between us. I forgot that this was wrong. When he turned off the faucet and looked over at me, his lips parted. My heart stuttered, and I knew deep down that this was only the beginning. The following morning, I stood in the kitchen, pouring coffee into my favorite ceramic mug, when I heard the sound of the back door creaking open. "Morning," Alex called out, his voice slightly hoarse, carrying the timbre of someone who hadn't quite shaken off sleep. I glanced over my shoulder, catching sight of him standing in the doorway. His hair was tousled, his t-shirt snug against his chest, and he held a toolbox in one hand. "Morning," I replied, my voice steady even though my pulse quickened.